Grid on the air with Ryan King, the in-house biologist here at Kalu, Yala, and we're going to talk about a couple days ago how we went fishing for freshwater shrimp.
Freshwater prawn.
Cool. And we encountered some ants. Do you want to talk about that?
Some ants, yeah.
A few million ants.
Yeah, a couple 100,000 probably. We were up on the tributary, what was it, probably like 9:30 at night or so, and I wasn't paying attention to where I was going a little bit, looking for down at the river for the prawns, and I stepped against a large log that was covered with moving. Actually, it was I think they were setting up a bivouac. So it's army ants are characterized by this behavior where they'll be nomadic. They'll cruise around. They never form a permanent colony like most ants do or most other types. So they move around, but then they do set up these sort of like campsites. And I basically bumped into one of their bivouacs, one of their holdups, and there's just all of a sudden hundreds of ants, maybe thousands on me, and they all decided to bite at the same time. And that's when I realized I was standing in an army ant bivouac, and then the hilarity ensued. Yeah, on video. So we'll cut that in at some point here. But can you explain what a bivouac is? It almost looked like a tube of ants. Ants, right. Yeah. So they actually will typically find kind of sometimes like a hollowed out area, a hollowed log, or a space that they can build a structure out of by clinging onto themselves. And they'll stay there for, I believe, depends on the species, but a few weeks at a time, and they'll take care of some of the larvae, and they'll have groups go out from the bivouac and hunt, and that's when you see the swarm behavior. And they bring in insects and arthropods and little bits of food, bring them back, and then every once in a while, when they're kind of exhausted the area after a short amount of time, they'll move on further away and set up and kind of repeat the same process. And then, so the New World type that we're running into is probably Eceton, but I didn't really get I'm also not a specialist in ants, and I had some friends that helped me with identifications, but I got a bad look didn't get a good look at them because I was wiping them off, trying to get them off of me. But Eceton, the queen will separate from the colony with about half the colony and restart a new colony. And she doesn't have wings like some of the other types do, but based on this behavior, there's actually been some new interesting research out of Panama. In the year about 2016, Corey Moreau published some compelling evidence that the landmass in Panama has risen above the water much longer than previously thought. So usually most geologists have been reporting that Panama was about 3 million years old. But what they did was they sampled the genetics of army ants, Eceton specifically, that only moves on dry land. They don't. They're not known to move on water or build any kind of, like, some ants will like make a big clump of ants and float on the dead ones to get around. I just saw a picture from the last hurricane in North Carolina of like fire ants doing that. Fire ants do. I'm in crazy. Louisiana when it would flood at the house I lived at. They would do that, and it's pretty crazy. So they work together. They sacrifice some of them, and then the others can float around. But Eceton was a good group for this. And she looked at about 9 different species, and from southern Mexico to Brazil, and characterized some of the genes that basically there's a couple techniques that show evidence of relatedness and sort of like a time frame of when they were when and where they were. So that indicated that strongly that there was land 4 to 8 million years ago based on the genetic analysis. And then there have been a couple more geological supporting pieces of evidence that suggest it might even be much older than 4 to 8 million years. But there's still a lot of controversy. So there's so much we don't know about all of the Panama geology and biology. But it's exciting to run into that stuff all the time here. Yeah, it's cool that it's like intertwined.
like cross like different types of science are coming together, and like we can tell about geology from ants. I've never even like thought about that.
The human migration, similar thing. The human genome has been used to track migration of humans all across the world from Africa, and those techniques are developed very proficiently in the last, especially 15 to 20 years, and have gotten cheaper and more easily and accurately used and applied. But the ants in general they've fascinated me because there's so many of them on the planet, and they don't. They're a good example of kind of superorganisms. These groups that have survived for tens of millions of years without decimating habitat. So if you take all the body mass of humans, like if you took up, there's about 7.5 or 6 billion humans on the planet right now. You kind of added that weight together, and there's somewhere between, and compared it to ants, not just army ants, but all ants, there's somewhere between 1 million billion and 10 million billion ants on the planet. So those weights would be very similar.
That's
so
insane.
That means all the world's ants. You realize that when you're here and you run into so many. I mean, we just set up for the camera and we're like, watch out for micro ants on the table.
Yeah.
So they're everywhere, but because they were forced to live with their environments under the rules of if you don't live sustainably, you die.
Yeah.
And I think that's helped develop their social organism behavior and eusociality, where you have castes in different types of ants that will work together. Some of them will be non-reproductive and will take care of the larva and sacrificial. There's some weird, bizarre cases of ants that, when threatened, will try to scare off predators by breaking their own bodies apart. Really bizarre.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
We during my semester a couple months ago, we witnessed some sort of ant war. It was just the normal like leaf cutters.
It's probably the army ants interacting with the leaf cutters.
It was insane, and it looked like a Lord of the Rings battle.
Oh,
like, they
cool,
were jumping over each other. There's like the big ones that are like fighting the other big ones.
Yeah.
The little guys are fighting each other.
So it's incredibly interesting coordination because they're able to run these giant groups with all these individuals, but each of them has a tiny brain, and there's no one in charge. There's no there's never like a head ant. Even though we think of like a queen as a hierarchical leader, the queen doesn't have a master plan for the society. It's self-organizational society. Yeah, so there's certain rules that lead to certain behaviors when there's certain stimuli, and there's some flexibility in that, and they developed over the course of evolution. So it's sort of like the ants are programmed to act in a certain way, given a certain chemical signal, and that's what they're doing when they're bumping into each other. They're kind of talking, so chemically speaking, and telling each other kind of what to do and what to attack.
It's crazy.
The army ant swarms are fascinating. They come through pretty quickly. They usually large ant swarms in the neotropics will have some ant birds. So the birds that their lifestyle's kind of connected to the ants, because the ants scare up so many animals. So we see the army ants coming in one direction, and all the animals on the ground are going to run the other way pretty much. And then so the birds can see stuff, and it activates the forest and stuff. Like, oh, it's coming this way.
So when you say they like post up for a little bit and hunt, what are they hunting?
Depends on, mostly here, the New World ants are mostly insects and arthropods. So you can leave sugar out, but they'll get cockroaches. They won't touch your food. I don't know if there's any exceptions, because again, there's over 200. There's Old World army ants.
What does that mean?
It means like African, Old World tropics, but we're New World, so Americas.
Yeah.
But it's usually just small insects, typically. And arthropods, they'll tear stuff. You'll see them tear apart cockroaches and break insects apart and bring them back and share them. I was told, and I'm not sure, I haven't checked this up if it's true, but I remember, or how many species it might be true for, but I remember an ant biologist telling me that if one of the army ants is killed, it changes the chemical signal and labels them food or injured,
For the rest.
or I think injured, yeah, for the rest of them.
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
yeah.
So while you were being bitten by them, you mentioned formic acid, and that's something that they use to break down.
Typically, some of their toxins will have formic acid, and I actually don't know too much about if that's exactly what kind and what levels of toxin they have. I really don't know much details about this stuff, but I do know that it's used by other organisms. So some of the poison dart frogs, we saw a false dart frog that night, but some of the actual dart frogs that make their toxin will rely on eating ants, and because the formic acid helps. They need the chemistry. They need that certain chemical to produce their frog toxin.
That's really cool.
So in captivity, sometimes we would feed them fruit flies, and researchers would notice that they would lose their toxicity because they're not getting that formic acid.
That's crazy.
But it hurts, yeah. And they coordinate, and they kind of all at once go off and bite. So that was a little bit unnerving.
Dang. So did you want to talk about frogs at all? We saw a lot of cool frogs last night, and the false dart frog on that same ant trip, or do you want to save that for another podcast?
We can mention it briefly now.
Cool.
The amphibian decline is one of the major mass elements of the overall mass extinction we're in. So vertebrates are threatened, all different types of organisms. You have insects going extinct in large amounts too from pesticides. We know about this, but it's especially amphibians that have been knocked down in the extinction level has been very high because they're a couple different of their physiological reasons. They breathe and drink through their skin typically. So if they're in anything, small levels of pollution can affect them. They're sensitive to their environment. They're a good environmental indicator. If there's pollution, they're going to be the first or one of the first larger vertebrates to respond to that, to change and to absorb toxins. There's also the chytrid fungus, which has spread throughout the Americas and wiped out an enormous amount of species. There's been recent research in Panama too. Fortunately, some of the populations appear to be resistant to the fungus now.
Oh, cool.
So that in time that stuff gets managed. Some will be resistant, and the resistant ones will survive and breed. And the fungus is just still incredibly invasive. The spores spread, and it spreads in water, and so it wipes out a lot of amphibians. The great thing here, I guess the other thing I would mention is, like you said, we saw a lot of frogs last night without having to get out of town square. Yeah. So 2 years ago when I showed up here, and the last couple of years, there were definitely less frogs because I spend a lot of my time night hiking all year round. I'm here all year round, and I go to the same areas, the same spots, and I don't know, if it's the weather, the season, or hopefully some of the impact that we're having with adding more plants and restoring the habitat. But there's a whole lot more frogs and more species here than I've ever seen, and that is not just because it's wet season right now. I saw it last wet season, and
that's exciting.
It's pretty cool. Yeah.
That's cool. All right, I think we're gonna wrap this one up.
Sounds good.
Another species next time.
Sounds good.
Cool. Thank you, man.
Thank you.